I want to understand what you did to become a millionaire at just 23 years old. You started building a couple Facebook applications as a freshman in college. Can you give me the full context? What was going on behind the scenes, and how did those applications go viral?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of context. I'm originally from India, never lived there, grew up in Oman in the Middle East, came to America as an international student at 17. Like a good Indian kid, I was like, let me study computer science. I thought I wanted to be an engineer. But that only lasted basically one summer. The summer after my freshman year, I was interning at Amazon as a software engineer, and I realized I didn't quite like what I was doing. I was a little bit in over my head. But that coincided with the launch of the Facebook platform, which, well, it was probably before you were born. But you could build applications on Facebook. And the cool thing is you could tap into the distribution network of Facebook. So you could grow from 0 to tens of thousands of users really, really fast. So I did that over the course of the summer. By the end of the summer, I got to the point of making $15, $20 a day, which was life-changing as an 18-year-old. I went back to college, kept running that business. And by the time I graduated, I hit $1 million just through these Facebook applications, which included like games, personality quizzes, all these like really, really very viral apps that didn't have a ton of utility, but grew really fast.
You were getting a bunch of attention from these Facebook applications. How are you able to monetize that attention?
So there were two business models. One was just ads. At its peak, we had about, I want to say 2 to 3 million daily active users, which I don't know how accurate Alexa traffic rankings are, but there was a time where it showed we had more traffic than the New York Times, LinkedIn, just raw user numbers. So ads was a big part of it. Then there was a big virtual currency economy. So we created an in-game currency, and you could either earn it by answering questions about your friends, or you could sign up for Netflix and earn a bunch of it. And we got paid in that as well. So at scale, it was roughly half and half between both those channels.
Yeah, and a lot of people know you were building a lot of these applications, but you were also networking with a lot of really high-level individuals. At 19, you've met with some of the world's greatest thinkers like Marc Andreessen and Naval Ravikant. What's one or two things that you learned from them that you took with you throughout the rest of your career?
It was fascinating how willing, and maybe you've noticed this, how much people are willing to meet with you when you're younger. There's a certain advantage you have, and I think it fades pretty early. I think it fades literally by the time you're even 21 or 22 years old. You're no longer considered that young. But living in Silicon Valley, I was amazed at how open people were to meet me just because I was young and I had done cool stuff at the time, the Facebook applications, which is another important part, right? Just being young is not sufficient. I think people still did it because you're doing cool things and doing interesting things, and you let your body of work speak for you. But I remember even early on, Naval specifically was very inspiring when I first met him. He, right from the outset, I'm trying to think of his exact analogy, but we were at a coffee shop, and he made the analogy that the person running the coffee shop probably is working as hard as the CEO of Starbucks. So why wouldn't you be the CEO of Starbucks? Even then, leverage was a big, big thing that he talked about a lot. And it was something that, especially considering where I grew up, the fact that people in America were willing to take you seriously at such a young age, especially in Silicon Valley, is super rare. I remember trying to go to a business meeting in India, and people were asking me where my dad was, which was, sort of disrespectful.
You were pretty successful with the apps that you were running. When did you decide that you wanted to close out building those and start focusing on your next endeavor?
We were at the mercy of the Facebook algorithm constantly. So we'd go from a business making 20, 30, at its peak, $50,000 a day to $20 the next day because they changed how they do the feed rankings, or they deplatformed you. And this had happened repeatedly. I think after it happened, maybe the 7th or 8th time, I'm like, look, I made money here. Nothing I'm working on is giving me I'm not proud of anything I'm building. I'm not proud of it, but there's nothing of lasting value. Let me go and try starting a real tech business. And I spent about 2 years trying different ideas with nothing quite hitting escape velocity until stumbling upon Teachable. I want to say at this point when I was just about 23 years old, moved to New York City, and then dove into that.
And I really want to understand, how is your dad influential in you wanting to continue to pursue the entrepreneurship route?
initially things were great. My parents were like so proud. They're like, you're making money online. That's awesome. The 2 years of me trying a lot of ideas and them going nowhere was tough. They couldn't tell, especially my mom, if I was actually doing anything because I talked about it. I was like, yeah, working on these ideas. And she's like, are you actually working? And it reached a point where, which is a very normal thing to say, but it felt insulting to me, where she's like, why don't you just go work for Facebook or something? But even through that whole thing, my dad constantly wanted me to be an entrepreneur. He wanted me to start a business. So he was very supportive and is like, nah, just give it some time. You don't have to jump into a job. He always felt that he grew up middle class, lower middle class. So it was hard for him to take a risk of starting a company because he had family to raise and all of that. But it was almost his wish that his children would have the opportunity to kind of do that to make up for what he couldn't do.
And you had this period of 2 years where you were thinking of all these ideas. Most of them, you said on Grace Beverly's show, just sucked. How did you come across the idea for Teachable, and when did you realize that this was something that could be really big?
The idea for Teachable, and this is a pattern I've seen with other startups as well, you almost never come to the idea initially. It always starts with a little bit of side hustle that keeps evolving into a bigger and better version of what it is. So with Teachable, for instance, we first started by, there were all these creators on YouTube, and I was like, can we arbitrage it by taking this YouTube content, posting it on Udemy, and making a little bit of money? That was step one. Step two is like, do we actually need these YouTube creators? Why don't we create our own content and put it on Udemy? Step three was like, why do we need Udemy at all? Let me take our own content, put it on our own website. And then we're like, why don't we offer the same tool set to other people? So it was like this series of ideas, each one slightly better than the last one, before which we stumbled upon what became Teachable. And even then, it was a side project built for my co-founder and I. It was for our own courses. And it was, a couple of months in that we realized we can offer it to other people. And probably 6 months from the first time we built it to the point that I had conviction this could be a venture-backed company, went to California, raised a round of funding, and all of that.
You mentioned that it was a side product. I had Dylan Diamond on the show a couple of months ago. He founded this company called Saturn. So they're a social calendar app that got really popular in high schools. And I asked him, like, how did you get it to grow so fast? He's like, very similar to what you just said. He's like, I didn't set out to build a product for the world. I just set out to build a really cool product for myself and my friends. It ended up exploding from there. What do you think that says about how to build a really good product?
It's not the only way, but it's my favorite way. And the reason is it's really hard when you're building a product for a customer persona you don't understand. Like vertical SaaS, someone is building software for construction workers. You have to spend so much time on customer development and you run the risk of no one actually wanting it. But when you build software for yourself, you have customer number one. Chances are a lot of other people like you. It just gives you a much more intuitive feel for how to build, which saves you a lot of time. So I think as long as I live and build products, it's an approach I will take. I took it with my next company as well. So I really like it.
12 months in, you raised about $1 million in venture funding, but you were only at $10,000 in monthly revenue. Walk me through the steps that you ended up taking to go from 10K to eventually $1 million a month in just a few years.
Yeah, so different stages. We were definitely a little bit slow off the block. It took us a little bit over 12 months to get to 10,000. 6 months later, we actually hit 90K. So we've got over $1 million in ARR in those 6 months. And I think that was us just figuring out how to better convert our free customers to paying customers. So a few different things. One, we realized that we were selling the software, but in reality, what we had to do was sell the solution, which I'll clarify what that means. But first, our pitch was, if you want to sell courses on your website, use Teachable. At the time, it was called Fedora, but either way, use the software. We then changed our pitch to like, hey, we are a comprehensive solution to teach you how to start an online business that includes courses. So, it just changed what we're offering quite considerably. We also got very good at running a series of webinars and workshops that improved our conversion rate from free to paid to, at its peak, almost 10%, which is very high. And it still leveled out at close to 5%. So got very, very good at that kind of marketing. And then we also started leveraging our successful customers, did a lot of storytelling with them, and tried to acquire people from their audience. That was the unique insight we had that a lot of other companies couldn't use.
Why couldn't they use it?
My personal perspective is with acquisition, you have to find your competitive advantage that's bigger and better than anyone else. And for us, direct sales never worked because we didn't make enough money per customer for me to hire a salesperson. Ads never worked because it was still a little bit niche to go out and find creators. But the unique insight we had is our most successful customers, especially if they're in a vertical of online business, internet, that kind of stuff, there were lots of people in their audience that in turn were ideal Teachable customers. So as soon as we had that insight, we doubled down on that by making them affiliates, by giving them equity, by hosting events, by doing storytelling. And honestly, that was like the one differentiating factor that allowed us to scale faster than anyone else.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of selling the solution. When I started the agency that I run today back in January, what I would sell was, hey, founders, we're going to get you on a bunch of different podcasts and we'll create content for you. Month 1, we did 2.7K in revenue. Month 2 was 5.4. Then all of a sudden we flatline. And for 3 months, I'm just constantly trying to figure out like, what the heck am I messing up in sales? And I keep looking at the wrong problem. What I ended up realizing is I kept trying to sell like the PR content piece and not what that is actually generating for them, which is customers. So I pivoted that and I'm like, hey, we're going to help generate demand for your company. We'll generate more sales and revenue for your business. And also, we're just going to try to be as helpful as we possibly can. Like, if I threw numbers out the window, like, how could I be as helpful as I possibly can? And all of a sudden, growth like exploded last month. So I noticed that's definitely a key industry.
Absolutely. And I think as founders, one of the lessons you learn is even while pitching my company to investors, one of the mistakes I made is I actually described what we do, while instead I should be describing the biggest version of what this can be. So when it comes to raising VC, investors are trying to work backwards from how this can be worth whatever, billions of dollars. It matters less describing what you do. Like, we saw dramatically better results while pitching Teachable. The original pitch was like, it's like Udemy, but on your own website. We'll help you put courses and it's your own branding. And that did okay. Like, investors were like, okay, sounds cool, little side project, whatever. But then we changed our pitch to, today, most e-commerce is the sale of physical goods. In the future, it will be the sale of knowledge, and we're the platform to power it. Exact same product, different pitch. One just talks about the biggest, grandest version of the vision, and obviously did a lot better when it came to raising money.
Yeah, and venture capitalists, as you well know, are looking for that 100x, 1000x outcome. So that's exactly the right way to pitch it. To grow, you would reverse engineer a lot of your goals every single month. What did that look like? And why was that process so essential for the growth of Teachable?
We used a framework where we had a certain look. Once we hired our head of growth, Andy, who now runs a company called Circle, the way we had an MRR goal for every single month. MRR is monthly recurring revenue. A lot of startups kind of just chill and they take the approach MRR will come where MRR comes in. We decided to be very intentional about it. And what we would do is we'd set a goal for every month. Like, let's say, this month we want to grow 20% or 15%. And we would run the math on what that would entail. So we'd create a simple model being like, okay, we'll churn 5% this month. So that means we need to add $6,000 in new MRR. Organic will account for $3,000, which means we have to find $3,000 of new MRR. And then we'd come up with initiatives that could hit those goals. And this was a really important exercise for a couple of reasons. One, it created a true growth framework, and it aligned us on what's important based on like hitting those numbers. We were almost never accurate in terms of where we'd end up, but that in turn gave us really critical learnings of like, oh, we thought this would do X, but it did Y. And then eventually with time, we got better and better at this exercise. And ultimately, I think the reason it worked is it never left growth to chance. Yes, there are a lot of months we didn't grow, a lot of months we missed our targets, but we didn't leave it to chance. We still had a plan. Whether we hit it or not was different.
And you found a way to get unstuck from that 10K to eventually doing 160K a month the next year. For founders in the audience who might feel that they're stuck, they're working every single day, nonstop like you are, grinding and they're just not moving closer to their goals? I know it's general, but what's one piece of it? What would you tell them? What advice would you
I think we need to differentiate between where they're getting stuck. If you're getting stuck super early, you probably don't have a growth problem. You probably have a product problem, right? Like there's a big, like initially you don't know if anyone wants the thing you've built. So this is counterintuitive, but I think in a lot of cases, you shouldn't do what all the books tell you, which is like keep plugging away and like, Elon slept in his office and Bezos never gave up. You probably should pivot. You probably should do something else. Like there's so many great ideas. If the market is telling you it doesn't want what you've built, that's a valuable insight and you should do something else. Like iterate fast. I think people hold on to ideas too long. But let's say you're the other type of stock where you have $1 million or whatever in revenue and you're now getting stuck. I think you need to like audit, and I'm talking at this point, I guess, more specifically about software businesses. But what I've found is eventually a great software business finds a way where existing customers become worth more over time. Like you have inherent expansion revenue. And if you don't have inherent expansion revenue, like a lot of whatever, these AI tools right now, they're like, all the like college student tools, for instance, like the homework helpers, blah, blah. I think a lot of those companies should not raise venture dollars. I think you can build a fantastic business that gets to a few $1 million in ARR, but eventually your churn offsets new growth. So that model it'll inherently get stuck at like, 5, 8, 10 million ARR. And you could either have a business cash flowing millions of dollars, that's a beautiful business for you, or raise 10 or $15 million and get stuck in this like venture capital mode when your business isn't supported. The flip side is if you have a business that either like Teachable, we processed payments for our creators. And as creators did better, the payments revenue grew every year. So that more than offset our user churn. With Carry, we have the same dynamic with assets on platform. Enterprise SaaS has that where companies add more seats. But unless your business supports good expansion revenue economics, I would say you're better off not raising venture dollars and just trying to build a business that grows really fast and you can cash flow quite a bit.
And I know it's hard to pick, but from the creators that have been on Teachable, what do you think is probably one of the coolest stories that you've seen that Teachable was able to help them?
It was fascinating seeing the sorts of courses being successful because everyone knows you'd have them make money online, blogging, whatever. But we had so many like crazy stories. Like one of our most popular courses in the music category was like mastering the handpan, which is an instrument I haven't heard of. And they made over $1 million.
Wow.
There's a course on like how to have a safe water birth that also made over $1 million. There's all these like really niche topics that ended up doing super well. There are also just like weird controversial topics. Like I remember there's one course that did quite well that was how do you overcome feelings of white supremacy? And it was insane that, and I remember at Teachable, we had a debate. Should we take this course down? Like, is it offensive? My argument is like, here are people who are paying money to deal with their feelings of white supremacy. But yeah, we ended up seeing all kinds of crazy courses.
That's pretty crazy. You were a couple years you're many years into the business, and all of a sudden one day you get this offer. You weren't looking to sell, but it was pretty intriguing at the time. What was the offer, and what did you think of it when you first saw it?
Business was humming. I think we were probably year 6, close to 20 million in ARR, not quite there. And it wasn't directly an offer. I think it was a private equity firm we had met with as we were discussing a Series B. The second most senior guy at the PE firm emailed me, which is a little rare, right? I was like, something's up. And he's like, can I drop by your office? If you know anything about like finance people, they don't come to your office. They make you go to theirs. So I figured something was up. So comes by our office and he's like, well, we have this company in Brazil. They do exactly what you're doing. They're making X dollars in revenue. And that blew my mind because I'd never heard of this company. And in our space, I know someone making that much money. But he's like, why don't you guys sit down? Like, it's like a blind date. Why don't you go to dinner, see if you like each other? And I was like, yeah, I'll do dinner. And did dinner, started chatting, saw eye to eye with the founders. We had a very similar worldview. They're building what we're doing, but bigger and international. And we soon started talking about what a deal could look like, and the numbers made sense. And, we ended up kind of moving forward with it. But one of my takeaways there is I always say, companies are bought, not sold. Like before we even met with them, they sat down in a boardroom somewhere and decided how it would be cool to buy us. And as a result, it just makes the deal substantially easier than if you are like, damn, I need to sell this company. And then you have none of the leverage.
How were they cool to buy you?
The reason I liked working with them, and I still continue doing, the biggest reason is it's a founder-led, founder-driven company. 11 years in, both the founders still run it. Fascinating trajectory where they raised $400,000 early on. Then no one wanted to fund them because they're in Brazil and, it's not the sexiest market. So they built this business out of profits and then raised it around 10 years later for $100 million to start doing acquisitions. So they almost bootstrapped this like massive billion-dollar company run by founders, led by founders. We just got along very well where it made sense.
At one point in the negotiation, everything starts slowing down a little bit. And you're like, hey, if I want this to close, we got to get this done. What did you do to speed up that process and get a deal closed in 4 days?
Yeah, so we'd reached a point where it was the first time for both of us. Like even they had never done a deal this size. And what happens when you're doing these kinds of deals is if you're not careful, lawyers on both ends can drag this on forever. It's almost in their best interest to let it go on super long. But I remember this was also like, March 2020. COVID was potentially around the corner. There was a lot of uncertainty. But at some point I remember being like, guys, the company kept growing, right, as we're doing this. And I was like, if we don't reach a conclusion soon, we're going to like the deal we agreed to is no longer on the table. And that was an impetus for them to like get here, lock down in a room. And basically we all decided we'd stay in this room until the deal closed. And we did that just in time right before New York shut down entirely. So it was a very, very close call on all ends.
During that time, were there any things that you learned about negotiation that most people might not know?
I've sold a company one time, talked to a lot of friends going through that process, and it's just it's like exhilarating yet exhausting at the same time. I mean, you're dealing with, in your brain, you have to account for the fact that there's two dramatically different outcomes. Either you go back to work like nothing has changed, or you make an infinite amount of money. And you have to be somewhat okay with both outcomes. Because if you go too far in one outcome, if in your mind you've sold your company before you've sold your company, that's when really bad things happen. So you have to try and be as okay with either outcome happening. You have to hide this whole thing from your team. I'm like disappearing for days on end. Everyone's like, why is he not at the office? Can't tell anyone what's going on. While trying to run the company as if the deal never happens. Like my biggest piece of advice to anyone going through this process is do not consider your deal done until the literal day you get money in the bank. I've heard so many horror stories of things falling apart, 4 days before, 3 days before. Sometimes, like the department of whatever, like antitrust stuff comes up. So it's exhilarating. It's so much fun, but it takes quite a bit out of you.
I presume that was an intense process. How did it feel after when the wire hit your bank?
It was the world's smallest violin will play for me because it was pretty anticlimactic because this was in the middle of April 2020. So at the time, to recall for people who don't remember what April 2020 was, we're locked in. This is when people are like wiping down packages from Amazon in case you might get COVID. So literally nothing happened or changed for quite a while after. The biggest turning point I found was honestly the year later when I was able to walk away from being the CEO, which at the time had reached a job that I honestly found quite stressful and didn't enjoy as much. I felt like that was a bigger turning point than, dollars in the bank or whatever.
It sounds counterintuitive, but why were you happier when you left as CEO and being your own boss per se to now not having anything?
I believe it's got to do with the stage of the business. Like by the end of running Teachable, and this also is, I'm sure, connected to why selling the company made sense. I just started feeling burnt out where we'd reached a size of almost 200 people, which was so different from the stages of like creating and building something from scratch that it almost felt like an organization. I mean, I had built it, yet I was not proud of like the organization itself. Like like my day to day was just stacked with meetings. We also at this point were a remote company because of COVID, which we were not used to being at all. And it just became this behemoth of an organization that was so different from why you start a startup. Even like from a product perspective, right? Like when you first build a product, people are like, wow, your product is so simple, it's so elegant, it does all these things. The incumbents are these like messy platforms. By the end, we were the incumbent. We were no longer the upstart.
Towards the end, you had about 200 people. Going back earlier to the conversation, when you were working at Amazon, the reason why you didn't like that job from previous interviews you've done is you said you just felt like you were a cog in a machine. How did you...
It was irrelevant what I did or did not do.
Yeah.
I didn't show up to work and no one realized, which is pretty bad.
Your entire team was working on like one page for Amazon, right?
Correct. We were doing the manage your inventory page within Seller Central. That was our, yeah.
How did you prevent employees at Teachable from feeling something similar?
To be honest, I don't think I did. So that ties back into why I think I may not have been a good CEO by the end. I think by the end, we became a version of what we wanted to avoid. I mean, another breaking point I think happened when I saw a designer not working on shipping customer value. Instead, they were working on making an executive's deck nicer for an internal presentation. It's a pretty colossal waste of company resources.
Yeah.
So I don't think I did a specifically good job of avoiding that. There's lessons learned, and I hope this time I will. But if I don't, I think I'll have less ego attached, and I'll be more willing to step aside and let someone else come in and run the company. Founding a company and running a company are completely different skill sets. I feel good about one of those skill sets. I still have to prove myself in the other.
Right after you ended Teachable, you left. You now have all this money in the bank. COVID hits. What's next? What's going through your mind?
So right when COVID hit, March 2020, I started investing a little bit more just because we're locked at home and had more time. I'd angel invested in a couple of companies before then, but I ramped it up during that period. After getting money in the bank, I'm like, I can finally put my own dollars in. So I ended up running a venture fund for about 2 years. We had two separate funds for almost 18 to 24 months. I ran a venture fund, invested in close to 100 companies, which was fun because as I stopped working at Teachable, it let me still feel like I'm involved in stuff. I'm learning stuff. I'm talking to smart people. I'm not isolated from the world.
Yeah, you had purpose.
Correct. Meanwhile, it also was a pretty easy job. Like investing is substantially easier than running a company. So I was able to travel. I was able to, play, got into surfing and playing tennis and seeing my family a lot. I left New York for a bit. So it was a perfect balance for that interim period of time, though it eventually became clear that I'm too young to do this for a living. So it was more like a good thing to do in between until I got ready to start something else.
Yeah, and you were building out this venture fund. You ran it for 24 months. When did you eventually realize, hey, I don't want to be in venture anymore. I want to go back to building. And what did you decide that you wanted to build?
It's funny. At first, when I left Teachable, in my mind, I'm like, I never want to do a startup again. Startups are pain. This is painful. But the funny thing about nostalgia is the way it works is with the passage of time, you start to forget the pain. You reminisce on the good times. And about a year and a half in, I just started to think about, wow, it was so fun. The early days, the sense of purpose of building something together. And towards the end of that period, I just started romanticizing the idea of a startup. Specifically, what I was missing is the sense of building something with other people. The venture fund was great, but it was sort of insular. I had founders I was working with, but I didn't have a real team or sense of us accomplishing something together. So towards the end of that period, started to think about it. I also started to self-identify what am I good at, and building companies. I almost think of it it's kind of my sport, and you don't retire from your sport at 32 or 33. I was I have another go in me, and eventually the turning point was I was going to go to Portugal. I was going to go surf for a couple of weeks, and that was going to be my time that I was going to fully think through if I wanted to do this. But when I found myself more excited to work on this idea than literally go on a vacation and surf, I was like, I knew it was time.
And so you've decided to start this company called Ocho, now called Carry. What was the idea behind it? How did you come up with the idea for that?
While selling Teachable, a few months prior to the transaction, I was able to hire smart lawyers and attorneys who structured the acquisition in a really smart way that ended up saving me literally millions of dollars in taxes. And that almost radicalized me that doing a couple of relatively, they're not simple, complex things, but someone can come in, do this and save you that much money was a bit of a light bulb moment. And the more I looked into the tax code, you realize there's so many things, especially for business owners, that no one knows, but if done correctly, can save you tremendous amounts. So it felt like a really good founder market problem, whatever fit, where we can do good in the world. It's a brand new problem space that's fascinating, and the opportunity is only growing. So I knew I wanted to do this problem. The specific product took some time. We decided to start with a one-person 401k since that felt like a really, really great wedge. Most of my career has been building and serving business owners in some way, shape, or form. So this felt like an extension of that mission in a lot of ways.
That one person or solo 401k, what is it and how does that work?
Yeah, so this was a very pleasant surprise as I started working for myself. But if you work for yourself, you can set up a one-person 401k, which in my opinion is the most powerful retirement account in America. It allows you to get a tax deduction upfront of almost $70,000, which even though your corporate 401k may allow, in reality, it's impossible to hit because your employer does not contribute enough. So you can get up to a $70,000 tax deduction. You don't pay any taxes on any of the growth inside. So if you get dividends, sales, whatever, you don't pay any taxes until you take money out in retirement. But you also have the opportunity to set up what's called a Roth account, which will allow you to not even pay taxes in retirement. All this while, because it's your own 401k, you can invest it exactly how you want. You can invest it in public stocks, equities, ETFs, but you can also do crypto, startups, real estate, venture fund, whatever. So almost think of it as a supercharged investment account that you get a massive tax benefit for doing. But prior to Carry, there was no easy platform to do all of this. So that became our first wedge, and then we built from there.
What do you think is, if you could go back in time and give yourself, when you founded Teachable, a couple of 2 or 3 tax tips or frameworks, what would you tell him?
So at Teachable, we got fortunate in that the biggest tax strategy for founders is something called QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. And if you're not careful, you can accidentally blow it up. We got lucky, we never accidentally blew it up. But QSBS is massive because it will allow every single shareholder, including employees, investors, founders, to not pay taxes on $10 million each when the company is sold. And with smart, attorneys and stuff, you can multiply that 10 million to 20, 30, or 40 million. At Teachable, we still did that, but it was dumb luck. None of us even knew about it. And, 5 years in, we didn't accidentally mess it up. So as a startup founder, honestly, that is the single biggest thing. There's a lot, the playbook is much wider if you're an individual making money. If I could go back and tell the Facebook app person stuff, I would have saved probably 40%, On Teachable, we got fortunate that there isn't much more I could have done.
How do you accidentally blow that up?
So the most common way is if you have a departing founder or employee that you do a big stock buyback for. And the challenge with that is that blows it up not just for you, for every single shareholder. So what I tell people is again, just talk to a tax attorney and double check any redemption where you're buying back shares is okay. Other less common ways of blowing it up is if you invest a lot of your balance sheet in random equities, like treasury bills or whatever is fine. But if you start buying corporate debt and stuff, they can take a stance that you're no longer a qualified trader business. You're an investment company, which would make you ineligible. There's all these weird nuance like that.
And you spent a lot of time becoming a tax expert for founders and entrepreneurs, and you talk a lot about it on Twitter. One of your posts that I thought was pretty interesting is that a buddy of yours will earn about $500,000 this year, of which he would have had to pay about $250,000 in federal, state, and self-employment taxes. Mm-hmm. you hop on the phone with him and you gave him advice that would save him 6 figures just this year. What was that advice?
Yep. And to be clear, by the way, this is exactly where even I was at the age of like 19 or 20, which is why this is the sweet spot where I think there's a lot you can do. So right off the top, typically most people don't realize when you work for yourself, you could pay almost 15% in self-employment taxes. This is like Social Security and Medicare taxes. You don't feel this as much as a W-2 employee because your company pays half. But what you can do is you can set up an S Corp, which allows you to bifurcate, let's say the 500K, you can pay yourself a 100K salary, take 400K in distributions, and now you only pay self-employment taxes on the salary. So that saves a few $1,000s right away. Secondly, setting up a solo 401k can get people a $70,000, $69,000 specifically tax deduction. But if you're married, as in this case, you can also hire your spouse in the business, pay them a reasonable salary, and now you each get your own $69,000 limit. So that really starts to multiply the benefits.
And there's a lot of other founders that have really taken advantage of the tax code to like an extreme, one of which is Peter Thiel. He'll have access to $5 billion in untaxed dollars. How did he do that?
So Peter Thiel, and by the way, I should caveat always that he was the first one to go to the IRS and be like, you should change this rule. Like he was very upfront about it.
I didn't know that. Okay.
He was very upfront about it. There's a great ProPublica article, but he was very upfront about it. But again, I mean, look, any smart person is going to look at a code, especially if you're an entrepreneur, and use it to the best advantage. So what Peter Thiel did, and again, this is all reported by ProPublica, so repeating basically that, but he set up a Roth IRA, and the way a Roth IRA works is you contribute after-tax dollars, but then never pay any tax on it in retirement. The cool thing about a Roth IRA is historically, at one point, top tax rates in America were 90%. I don't know if we'll go back there, but a Roth IRA protects you no matter where taxes go in the future. But what he did is he bought some of his founder's shares in PayPal from his Roth IRA. When PayPal sold, that was worth tens of millions of dollars. And from that point on, he just used it as like a personal investment piggy bank. And you imagine the combination of like tens of millions of dollars in a tax-free account combined with one of the world's greatest investors. Just went on an epic, tear and is now at least $5 billion, potentially much more, on which you won't have to pay a single dollar in taxes.
Wow. Is that rule changed now, or?
So the only part of what he did that is questionable is if you are a founder, it's debatable if you can buy your own shares in a Roth IRA. And the reason being is they're self-dealing transactions. Doesn't mean you can't. It has to do with the thresholds of how much of the company you own. It just gets a little bit tricky. So what I tell people is, if you want to be safe, don't buy your shares, but I can invest my Roth IRA in your company or my friend's company and all of that. So the general idea of taking your Roth and investing it in assets with high upside works super well. If it's your own company, it could get a little complicated.
Gotcha. And before we wrap it up here, we have a couple of closing questions. One is, what's your greatest failure and what did you learn from it?
I think there are a lot of moments at Teachable where I felt like I was a complete failure as either I had to straddle between being a failure as a human or a failure as a CEO, and I felt like I had to pick one path or the other. Like I feel like as a CEO, you have to operate almost looking at humans as like interchangeable pawns or whatever in this like grander scheme of building a company. While if you're operating as a human, you're thinking about loyalty, friendship, all of these other things. So I constantly felt like I was failing at one or the other. And at different points in my career, I think I failed as a CEO. And other points, I think I was a good CEO, but like may have failed as a person.
How can founders balance that dynamic?
I don't have a great answer to that. It's a question I ask myself all the time. Like, is it possible to be an incredible CEO without being mildly sociopathic? I don't know. And that's why I've struggled. And that's why I don't know if I'll always be a CEO. By the way, I do think you're not really a CEO until you're at least 50 to 100 people. Like everyone says you're a founder CEO, but there really isn't CEO type stuff to do.
Gotcha.
But can you be a great turnaround CEO where you have to come in and fire 700 people while being a good person? I don't know.
Well, I think at that scale, then it's more of a numbers game
Mhm.
than an EQ game. And at that point, if you're firing 700 people, there's a good chance that you don't know all
Actually,
those
yeah.
people personally, right?
Yep.
So, second, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I was pretty young when I read Richard Branson's autobiography. I think it was called Losing My Virginity. And what kind of stuck with me through that book is like the sense of just like having a blast through doing everything, which I find to be such a refreshing attitude since so much startup stuff is about the pain, the struggle, like, like the fight and how hard it is. What comes through, not just in Branson's book, but the way he sort of has run his companies, is a sense of this man looks like he's having the best time in his life and just, doing it for the sheer love of the game. So whenever things get hard, whenever we're in a difficult time, even now, if you look at like our company culture and what we believe, one of our beliefs is we take our work seriously, we don't take ourselves seriously. And that's something we're trying to stick with.
Yeah, and you joke with the person at your desk every day,
Mhm.
right? Three
Yep.
jokes a day. Yeah, I've noticed that the hard parts of entrepreneurship are traditionally very over glamorized,
Mhm.
and the fun parts are not. And now that you brought it up, I think the reason why is because nobody's impressed by you having fun, right? But people can be impressed by you doing hard things. So I don't know if that will ever change, but
But where I do think it changes, by the way, is I think when you talk about, again, all these billionaires that have historically been quite unpopular, you look at the ones that are popular to normal people, not the tech community, are the ones that are having fun. Like, even, I mean, Zuckerberg's a great example. As he looks like he's enjoying his job more and his life more, he's become more likable. You think about, there's a lot of very rich celebrities that don't face as much stigma, and what are they doing? They're just having a good time. So I do think if you come across like authentically being yourself, genuinely enjoying what you are doing, you become more likable to the masses, even if it gets you less like kudos from like other entrepreneurs or whatever.
yeah. And what's one rule you live by that most people don't?
Something really important to me, and it's only gotten more important, is I have this sense of immigrant guilt having left my parents, left my family quite young. They're getting older by themselves. So right now I try and talk to them every single day. I don't know many other people that do that. And very often I miss, but like literally every morning I will try and speak to them no matter what. And I'll try and see them 4 or 5 times a year. And I don't know many people my age who do that.
Yeah, I don't. I also don't know a ton of kids my age who are talking to their parents very frequently. Given I am in college, but the first month everybody's calling their parents, and then after that, it's not as
For me,
much.
it's all about baking it into the routine. It's usually like on my walk to the office or on my walk to lunch. And very often it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you take your calls that you end up walking around a lot, you take like 20,000 steps a day. I've noticed that when I'm taking calls and I'm walking, my mind just seems a lot sharper. Do you see something similar with you?
Absolutely. I can't think while seated at a desk. All my best ideas, it happens when I'm in motion walking. Ideally, sometimes even walking without music kind of makes my brain work.
Yeah.
I also can't be on a phone call and be stationary. I have to move.
Yeah. Walking without music just makes yourself force like you have to kind of talk to yourself. Sometimes you look a little crazy doing it, but hey. I guess last up, if I slid you over a phone and you could call your 18-year-old self, would you call? And if so, what would you say?
I would call. I mean, this is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. I've almost linearly every subsequent year of my life has gotten better, and I think it would be a good reminder to almost just like chill out a little bit. Like I remember I don't know if it's existential angst or whatever. When I was 18, I really wanted to like prove something, and just like a reminder that it'll all kind of figure itself out. I definitely feel like so far, I mean, I'm 35. My 30s have definitely been the best decade of my life. And I think that would be a good reminder.
Do you ever wonder if you did tell yourself that maybe you wouldn't?
I don't think anything would change.
Nothing would change?
Anything would change.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Thanks, Ankur, for taking the time to join the show. Greatly appreciate it. We'll have a link to Carrie in the episode description down below for any founder interested in checking that out and not paying as much money to the government. So thanks, Ankur.
Thanks for having me.